everyone. Today I am so honored to have with me author Seaman Bentley. And Stephen's new book is called Undercover, Operation Julie, The Inside Story. And we are talking to him. He is in the Philippines. So thank you so much, Stephen.
Yes, good evening here. Good morning to you.
Exactly. This book was captivating. I mean, the story itself is good to begin with, but your writing of it was just, I didn't set it down. I actually read it on my Kindle and I carried it around with me and I read it like while I was doing dishes and while
Wow.
it was so, especially, all right, I'm 52. So this happened in 1977. Operation Julie. So I was young. I never heard of it. So to me, it was just such an amazing story. And I was like, why hasn't there been a movie about this or something, you know? But, you know, for everybody out there, I'll let you explain Operation Julie for people who don't know what that was.
Yeah, okay. Operation Julie, one slight correction. It actually started off in 1976. And it concluded in 1978. It was a 2-year operation, and it was quite unique. Still is unique in the annals of crime investigation in the UK. It's a UK-based story, UK-based operation, and it was unique for one main reason is that we don't have a federal system of government as you do in the United States. So there's never been a national law enforcement agency. Each police force has its own geographical area. And you know, the rights and the privileges and the jurisdiction are all guarded very jealously for historical reasons. So it was an 11 distinct, separate police forces came together. In fact, it was really a de facto national drug squad that operated for 2 years. So that's where it was unique. And really, to wrap it up, to sum it, what it was about, it was really about busting 2 LSD laboratories. But when we started off, we thought there was just one. And both of them turned out to be supplying around about 90% of the world's acid or LSD, including to the West Coast and the infamous West Coast gangs, the Hells Angel gang over there, and they had connections way back. There were plenty of American connections to the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, Timothy Leary, the Ken Casey, the whole Millbrook situation in New York State. So that, in a nutshell, is what Operation Julie was about. Just to finish off there, it was very successful. There were, I can't remember the figures now, something like 15 people, 15 conspirators ended up serving in total about 120, 130 years. Or they were sentenced anyway to 120, 130 years jail, because we have a different penal system from the United States, but I won't go into that. That can get very boring with the differences.
Well, and that's what I was also thinking about. You know, it's hard for me to think about what the drugs were like here in the 1970s, except that my dad, you know, and I'm 52. My dad was young. Okay, he had me. My parents were in. My mom was 17. My dad was 20, and
Sure.
He was very big pothead. Okay,
Yeah.
So I grew up with, you know, pot was kind of a part of my existence. He gave me pot. He bought me pot stuff for my birthdays. I'd get a bowl for my birthday, and you know, like things like that. So I
hope you ran into diapers when he gave you pots.
It was crazy. It really was. I mean, even for being in the 70s, I don't know that too many people grew up the way I did. But on the other hand, I do remember, like, LSD. I remember him telling me one time, you know, don't do LSD, because the one time I did it, I met Satan.
Yeah.
I was like, so that scared me right there. I mean, if you want to tell a kid not to do drugs, like right there is like, I was like, I don't think I want to do that. Okay, I won't do that.
That's right. I mean, you've read my book.
Yes.
You know that I have a lot to say about various drugs, including LSD. And the trouble with LSD is there are many advocates for its use, and apparently that there is now a bandwagon gathering steam to bring it back in for therapeutic treatment in a mental health setting.
Oh.
And I think there's some mileage, some validity in that, by the way. But it's a very unpredictable drug. It doesn't suit everybody. And as your pop told you, you know, he saw Satan, and many people did have some very weird and wonderful and frightening experiences.
Yeah, and my dad wasn't, of course, you know, I did learn from your book is that, you know, you tell people, like, don't do it alone, and then be in a good frame of mind. My dad was a very depressed person, so it doesn't shock me that was the experience that he had. But I was wondering, so when this was all going on and the police force did decide that they were going to do something about this, okay?
Yeah.
Was it because of, you know, was it because my son actually asked me this question last night when I was telling him about it. He's 18, and he said, you know, why was LSD such a bad thing then?
Yeah.
Was it hurting people? You know, was it, you know, what was the problem?
That's a very good question that your son posed. And indeed, there's still a lot of young people these days thinking, well, you know, what was all the fuss about? Back in the 70s, LSD got an awful lot of bad publicity. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of it was never substantiated. The press and the media gave it a very bad name. People did freak out. But, you know, I've researched it a lot, and you know, I can't find any substantiated evidence whatsoever to say that it directly caused somebody's death. Mm-hmm. Number one, it's not a drug of addiction like heroin is, like methamphetamine, ice or shabu as it's called in the Philippines, or crack cocaine for that matter. It's not a drug of addiction. So I can understand young people querying why there was such a big fuss, but there was such a big press hullabaloo at the time that how bad it was, and people flying off skyscrapers and hurtling to their death. You know, and as I say, I haven't found, and I'm not the only commentator that says this, I've found no evidence to substantiate that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, it is illegal here. So it's like, it is illegal. And I guess it was illegal then, you know, so it's like, there's that. That's what I was trying to tell. I was like, there is that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is illegal.
Yeah, very much so.
You know?
I mean, it's still classified in the UK as a Class A drug. Class A are the most serious kinds of drugs with the most severe penalties. So, you know, it's still a serious crime to use it or deal in it. So, despite what I say, what I've just said,
I know,
there are still problems involved with it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But what I loved about your story is I've never read a book by somebody who's actually gone undercover. And your story about what you had to do to really get them to believe that you were not a cop, first of all, you know, and then to live in their world for that extensive period of time. I don't know that anybody... My other son that I was talking to, I have 6 children, so I'm going to keep saying sons, and it'll be confusing. He's 28, and I was talking to him, and he said he actually read a book about cops that go undercover, and how they don't try to let them do it for an extended period of time because of the problems of coming back out and going back to their real world kind of a thing. And you talk about that a lot, about the back and forth of who you were. You know, when you were Seaman Bentley, and then when you were Stephen Jackson, you know?
Yeah, and as you know, it's in the book there, as you well know, and whilst I was undercover, I was more comfortable in the skin of Steve Jackson, as opposed to, you know, the real me. And, you know, and at the time, that begs the question: who was the real me?
Right.
You know, again, you know, there's a chapter in the book early on called "Who Am I?" And that's, I think, that is the kernel of the story. That the identity confusion, and bear in mind when you're talking about going undercover back in the 70s, especially in the UK, there was no training. Me and my buddy, we were pioneers. There was absolutely no training whatsoever. There was no debriefing, no come down, nothing. We had to make up the rules as we went along.
Yeah, I know, that's just crazy. It was like, even though you were making phone calls back to them to report,
Yeah,
it was so, you were besides those phone calls,
yeah,
23 hours of the day, you were Stephen
yeah,
Jackson, you know?
yeah. And of course, back in the day, there were no cell phones, so
Right.
it was a case of using public call boxes and calling back into the operational headquarters, into the office.
Did you ever get to the point that it's like, I just don't feel like doing, like, I don't feel like being Stephen Bentley today. Like, I don't feel like doing that. I don't
Yeah.
know, like that you're like, we got to make that phone call. Like, I don't feel like doing that today.
Yeah, no. If I hope I don't misunderstand the question. There were many times when I was so enrolled
Right.
as Jackson, the boy about town, you know, the Jack the Lad type character, and pseudo pretend drug dealer.
Right.
I felt more comfortable in that role than I did in my own genuine straight role, if I can put it that way. And there were times when life was an awful lot easier being Jackson than Bentley.
Right.
A lot easier. Yeah.
That's what I was
There was
kind of, yeah,
no
that's what,
responsibility for a start.
well, exactly. I was kind of thinking that way. I was like, when you think about going into that world, there's the reason it's so appealing is because it is so there really isn't a lot of responsibilities, and you
Correct.
said at one point in the book, like, you were almost so immersed that it was like it was hard to come out of,
Yeah,
and
very good.
yeah, and be Stephen Bentley.
Very difficult.
I would think, especially with so little contact. Now, how much did you like have? You say you had days off, okay? But on those days
Yeah.
off, did you go back to your home?
Yeah, and when I say we had days off, obviously it wasn't kind of putting in a regular shift.
Right.
We'd be away, and when I say we, I mean my undercover buddy and I, Eric and I. You know, we would be embedded in our undercover role for days, 10 days, 2 weeks at a time. And then we had part of the cover story was we dealt in used cars, and the story was we used to go to the auctions some 200 miles away, buy cars cheap and sell them. And that gave us an excuse to go away for a few days, because we'd go, hey guys, hey man, running short of bread, got to go and buy and sell a car, so we disappear and for 2 or 3 days at a time. And that in itself, as you've already hinted at, was difficult because, to be honest with you, I didn't want to be home. It was so difficult to be home for 2-3 days. I was just glad to get back on the road again and back into the role of Jackson.
Wow. And you were married during this time too, right?
Yeah, but that didn't last long. As you can imagine, the poor woman, I got married not too long before Operation Julie started, and the end of the road was already in sight by the time of the end of the operation, and shortly afterwards we got divorced. So it was a short-lived marriage, and on reflection, with the benefit of hindsight, it was a hell of a tough time for her. Because I just didn't want to be at home, and then when the operation finished and they sent me back to inverted commas normal duties, normal detective duties, I was a very unhappy bunny, and I wasn't very easy to live with. So the poor woman, no wonder we got divorced. It wasn't her fault; it was my fault. Mea culpa.
Right, and it does sound like when you were Stephen Jackson. I mean, you did smoke marijuana, but you drank a lot, and I imagine that was
Yeah,
also a very difficult,
yeah,
thing to like come
yeah.
home and then not drink. When you were like drinking pretty heavily during,
Very,
you know.
yeah. Drinking very heavily and smoking a lot of marijuana. And these guys were hitting marijuana. They were kind of experienced potheads. They get the. I don't know whether you guys would call it a chillin or a bong, but they get the pipe out and they take a big hit and inhale it. And eventually I got to that stage of doing the same thing, to keep in character. So I was using a lot of marijuana. And people talk about, again, I write about it in my book, people talk about hallucinating. You can definitely hallucinate if you get enough THC, which is the active ingredient of marijuana. If you get enough of that stuff inside you, you can hallucinate, as I did. I mean, as you remember, I was seeing a dragon's head in the toilet bowl because one of the other things that one of the other things that it did, it made me sick the first time I took a really big hit of it. So yeah, and there was also cocaine. Cocaine was around, and so I was using that. But yeah, the most prevalent source of potential abuse was alcohol. I mean, I was drinking a hell of a lot of alcohol. And I was putting in expense claims for no receipts for obvious reasons. I was putting expense claims in for a bottle of whiskey a day at one time.
Wow.
And that was on top of all the beer that was being drunk. So yeah, they were hedonistic days.
Well, I do have to say that when I used to smoke pot back in the day,
Yeah.
I used to always have like these outer body experiences, and I used to tell my children that because, since pot was so free flowing in my house, once my children became teenagers, I had to decide because I didn't use it as an adult. I never did,
Sure.
and so I had to decide which way do you go with that. Do you say go ahead, or do you say I'm not going to allow that? I always had a very difficult time trying to decide on my own how I felt about it. But as they got older, they had to make their own decisions anyway.
They work. You're right there. I think. I think they work it out for themselves.
Yes.
I think the thing is not to either condone it or condemn it.
Right.
Try and. Yeah, even if you try and show them the literature or guide them to websites, young people are going to take no notice. They're going to find out for themselves. And a lot of it is peer pressure.
Yes.
As you well know.
Yes.
A lot of it, if they're at college and everybody is smoking it, then, if you're that way inclined, you're going to join it.
Yeah. And
we'll figure it out.
Exactly. And I took my two youngest boys to California last year, and I forgot that it's legalized there. And we were at a restaurant, and people were smoking marijuana. And my one son was like, "Oh my God, that's right. We're in California." Like, it was so weird because I'm in Pennsylvania. Yeah. It's not legal in Pennsylvania. So, in the United States, as it's becoming more legal, it is something they'll deal with on their own because, of what's going to happen in their atmosphere. But
you're right. I mean, there's more and more states legalizing, so it'll probably be nationwide at some time in the not too distant future.
Yes, exactly. So it won't have to be too much of then it'll just be an age restriction thing or, something else with it. But okay, I want to talk a little bit about Smiles though, because this character, I mean, I so felt for you when as you became really close with him, because of course you're with these people, all the time, and in the back of your mind you're like, I have to figure out a way to bust them, okay? But then as you're getting to know them as people, not drug dealers, you're starting to like them.
Well, that's right. That's you've hit the nail on the head. It's okay, he was a lawbreaker and he knew the consequences, but being a lawbreaker per se, in my book, doesn't necessarily make him or anybody a bad person.
Right.
There are lawbreakers that can be decent people. In fact, many of them. It doesn't make them a bad person necessarily. It doesn't necessarily make them an evil person. Yeah, he was a great guy. I loved his company, and we had some great times together, both with and without drugs and alcohol. But most of it was drug and alcohol fueled.
Right.
Yeah, no, great time. And as you know, an adjunct to that story is that when I was sat cross-legged meditating with him in his home one night with all his Buddhist statues and the incense burning, and we were chanting some mantra or other, and we'd been smoking a lot of dope. And I came very close to revealing who I was, because I felt that close to him, and I'd met his wife and his child, and I really liked the guy, and I came very close to revealing who I was and warning him, but for what I think are fairly obvious reasons, I stopped myself from doing it.
Yeah, well, when I was reading that chapter, I was thinking, because at some point you feel like a fraud, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive deception,
right?
And it sounds kind of weird to anybody, people who know that I've read this book, people who know who have read my book. I've said something similar before, where I'm talking about it being a massive deception, but I'm basically a straightforward, honest kind of individual, which I think is true.
Right.
And there's a kind, there's a paradox there, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to deal with. It really is.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, put in that kind of a role, and you're like trying to bust him for his illegal things, but then you're like, but I'm also being a fraud of who I am in trying to do this, that it does I would think that it starts to feel a little dirty in a way, like a little bit, like I'm not being genuine of who I am. And he's believing this.
For sure, that's right. Not being genuine, I felt deceptive.
Yeah.
I felt ashamed. Feelings of guilt, and those feelings of guilt stayed with me a long time. Long time. I'm talking, I wouldn't like to put a figure on it, but for many years, those feelings of guilt. And many times I wondered, what he's doing, many times I used to think that. And I think we had quite a strong bond at the time. Certainly from my point of view, that's the case. Smiles has said certain things since my book came out that I think he's trying to backtrack a bit, but I think if the truth be known, that he felt the same way about me as I felt about him.
Right.
It kind of wasn't a sexual thing. It was definitely a kind of bromance thing.
Right.
Yeah, without
close.
shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
Yes. Now, you did get to see him before you got to see him in court, right?
I got to see him after he was arrested.
Okay.
And I went into his cell, the big iron cell door. And the jailer opened the door, and I went in there. And I cleaned up a little bit, but I still had, I got rid of the beard, but I still had the long, droopy Mexican-style mustache, and my hair was still pretty long. And Smiles kind of looked at me, thinking, what the hell is a cocaine dealer doing here? This is the big LSD bust. I must explain there that towards the end of my undercover days, Eric and I came across a big plot to import cocaine into the UK from Bolivia via Miami and various other locations in North America. And Smiles had got wind of this, and he tried to buy kilo weights, keys of cocaine from me believing, that I was quite some connected dealer. So I walk into the cell, and he's looking at me thinking, what the hell's this cocaine dealer doing here? The penny didn't drop, but then it did drop. And he realized that I was an undercover cop. And we just hugged each other, and he I'll always remember his words. He said to me, "No hard feelings, man. It's part of the game." Which is Smiles' attitude to a T. He knew what the risks were. He was making good money. When they searched his small house, his small cottage in the middle of Wales, when he was busted, they found £14,000 concealed in a cereal packet. Now, £14,000. We were probably back in the day of $2 to the pound back then, not like today.
Right.
So let's say $28,000. Well, let's be conservative. Let's say $22,000 back in 1978. Right. That is a lot of money. A lot of money by anybody's standards.
Yes.
And that was just one kind of. That wouldn't represent, a year or 2 years dealing. That would be recent dealing. So he knew what the risks were. The rewards were good, but the risks were also great as well.
Do you think, did he have any kind of revelation like, I knew it, or do you think he really didn't know?
He definitely didn't know.
He definitely didn't. Okay.
He we have to keep it clean on the radio. I think I can use the acronym BS.
Right.
He said certain things since the book published, which, to be frank, are BS.
Okay.
But he knew from the start who we were, stuff like that. It's BS. And let me quickly tell the listeners why. This is a man who invited my undercover buddy and I into his own home, not once, on a great number of occasions. We smoked marijuana together, we did cocaine together. Eric, my undercover buddy, even babysat for him and his wife, while Smiles, myself, his wife, and a big Sudanese doctor that we just met, we all got high on coke and we went for a meal to a nearby town. And then towards the end of my undercover time, he comes to me and he asks me, he's got wind of the fact that we're involved in a massive cocaine deal, and he's trying to buy kilo weights of cocaine from me.
Right.
So I ask the listener or any observer to make their own minds up. He's saying that he always knew. I think the evidence is stacked up against him. And just let me finish on this point. On that point, just one other thing. I think one of the reasons he says that, I can put myself in his shoes.
Right.
He gets into prison. And he's serving his time. And people, other prisoners, must come up to him and say, "Hey, Smiles, what's going on, man? You must have known those guys were cops." And what's he going to say?
Right.
He's going to say what he's going to say what he said. Of course, I knew who they were. I knew all along, etc., etc., etc. He's repeated that story so many times. He now believes it.
Right.
And that's what does happen when somebody repeats a lie so many times. They actually do come to believe it. Yes. So anyway, I pointed out a few flaws in why I think he's wrong. Well, I know he's wrong. And I'll let the listeners decide for themselves.
Yes. Yeah, and what's weird is that in the back of your book, well, not weird, but I mean, just to tell you what kind of day we're living in, you've actually communicated with him through Facebook, right?
Yeah, that's right. Facebook, yeah, and on my website, he left a comment on there. But most of it is all quite friendly and indicated as well. I recently learned that his big pal Buzz, who I mention in the book,
yes,
his big pal Buzz recently died, and I heard about that. on the grapevine.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about that, and I passed my condolences on through Facebook to Smiles, and quite genuinely, I said to him, very sorry to hear about Buzz, and sorry for your loss, and condolences. So yeah, that's I think we're still friendly. We haven't had any contact for months and months. In fact, probably about a year now.
Right.
So there we are.
Interesting. So you're now in the Philippines. What brought you to the Philippines?
You'll have to wait for my. You'll have to wait for the full autobiography.
Oh yes.
I wasn't minded to write another non-fiction book. I've written 2 non-fiction books now, and I'm just about to publish my first fiction book, which is a novella about an undercover cop. Ha ha ha.
Awesome.
I'm hoping that'll be published, available on Amazon end of October, I think. But yeah, I wasn't minded to write an autobiography. I did a radio interview with a radio station in the UK, and the host was talking to me after we went off air, and she was saying, wow, what a fascinating story. Not just about Operation Julie, but since I left the police force, I've done so many jobs, and I was a trial attorney for 14 years in the UK.
That's crazy.
And I've done all kinds of things, and I've done some weird stuff in my life, and things have gone. You call it Chapter 11, we call it bankrupting. I went bankrupt or Chapter 11. I've had some bad times as well as some good times. So, I'm not really plugging the fact that one day there will be an autobiography, and I wasn't minded to write it, but the host of this show, she really prompted me. She said, "No, you should." And since writing the Operation Julie book, Undercover book, I've built up a nice little fan base, and many of them are dying to know the full story as to why I ended up in the Philippines.
And you know what, Stephen? First of all, you are an amazing writer. Okay, you tell an amazing story, and that not everybody can do that. Okay, so there's that, and then there's also the part. Yeah, this book was great about Operation Julie, but it really didn't talk. I think you could do it talking about like your personal life during that. Like you kind of hinted at it, and we got a little taste of it. But I think during that time, you could. Yeah. I don't know. I'm for it too. I think she's right. I think you should do autobiography. Yeah. So in case you need another.
But to answer your question in a nutshell, I had financial problems with the equivalent of the IRS.
Oh, okay.
UK equivalent. I had big financial problems. I could have dealt with it really, but I buried my head in the sand and thought it would all go away, but it didn't, and it went from bad to worse. And as a result, I wasn't able to practice at the bar anymore, and so I did a kind of another couple of jobs before I got to a retirement age, and then another divorce happened, and it hit me quite badly. And I was in a bad way with personal relationships, and my brother had died in Florida, actually. He'd lived in Canada a long time, and I was very close to my brother, and that hit me very badly. So I was in a bad way. Mm-hmm. So I decided to up sticks and head for Asia. Spent a couple of years in Thailand, got scammed in Thailand, and ended up in the Philippines and met a lovely lady in the Philippines, and we just got married, and she's definitely not a scammer, and I love her to bits, and I'm very happy. So that, in a nutshell, is why I ended up in the Philippines and what I'm doing here.
Well, you know what, Stephen, you're like a 9 life guy. You've had like 9 lives.
Yeah. Now that reminds me, the radio host that suggested I should write the autobiography, she said it's not an interesting life. She said it's interesting lives, plural.
Right. That's exactly right. You've had 9 lives, and it would make a great story. But you'll know when you should do that. And I can't wait to read the novella, though. I mean, I think that'll be amazing because
I can't give you the title because there's a swear word in the title, a strong swear word.
Well, you could spell it.
But what I can do, I can give you the brief blurb, which will take about 2 seconds, And the blurb is, Steve Reagan, a British undercover detective, is tempted by the riches of drug smuggling so he can be free of debt and petty police bureaucracy. He does one deal, which backfires, and he is shot and left for dead by Bill Morris, a Miami-based drug lord, but recovers in time to track down Bill, who is about to murder a London judge. This is the first in a trilogy of shorts featuring Steve Reagan, undercover cop.
Nice.
Thank you for letting me get the plug in.
That's right, absolutely. That right away, it's like, wow, that's a great book, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm so happy to be able to talk to you. I mean, everybody, go get this book, Undercover. It's amazing. Like I said, you know, a million times, you're such a great author, and I hope that your nine lives, your ninth one is, you know, of best-selling author and storyteller.
Yeah, it's out in fully revised, fully expanded second edition format. So I don't know which one you read, Michelle.
I did read that one. Yes, I did read the.
Yeah. And there's been a slight. I've done a slight price reduction as well for the US and the UK. So it's probably even better value than ever now.
Yes, and I will have all the links underneath this video so everybody can find it on Amazon. And I look forward to talking to you again about future books. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to. Anytime at all. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, thank you. Have a great night.
And give my regards to your 6 kids.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Talk to you soon.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.